Hey guys, Matthew, and today I want to talk about a pretty touchy subject. Now, I'll try to make this as neutral as possible. I will state my opinion, however, at some point, but I'll make sure to tell you guys when I'm actually stating my opinion. Otherwise, it's going to be as neutral as possible because these are issues, I guess, that you could say have two very different sides when you actually go and look at the bigger picture. So what I'm talking about is basically multi-boxing, or at the very least using multiple clients in order to farm certain content. And the two biggest ones that I want to talk about today is especially going to be invitations and also beast farming. Now, before you start typing and calling me a hypocrite, because I have made videos about both of those things, I want to state the fact that the reason why I made these videos is not necessarily because I think they're good for the economy. The reason why I made this series, the 0.1% series, which does have many videos based on things like duping and multi-boxing and whatnot, is because I wanted to level the playing field. I wanted not only for a very select amount of people to be able to do those things, but for more people to be able to do those things. So not only are we removing the monopoly from different, people, but also we are getting more attention to what is potentially an issue, and in my opinion, also an issue. All right. So first off, I want to talk about invitation farming, and I'll talk mostly about the feared, but note that this is a problem that is not only with the feared. That is just, I would say, probably the most obvious reasoning. Also, the feared is considered to be the highest tier content in the game right now, outside of like maybe deep delving. So it is literally the highest tier content you can possibly do. So to look at the feared invitation and the effect of multi-boxing, we need to look at basically the price of different items, and one of the most insane one right now is Bottled Faith. So if you look at Bottled Faith and Exalt in different leagues, we'll see that, for example, in Harvest, it was around the 10 Exalt or so, a little bit less than that, 8 to 9 Exalt for the majority of the league, which is probably about as cheap as it had ever been, realistically. That is a pretty cheap Bottled Faith. If we look in Heist League is pretty expensive, somewhere around the 20 plus Exalt, 15 to 20 plus for the majority of the league. But remember that the value of Exalts was incredibly cheap back in Heist League. If we look at Delirium, we see a pretty expensive, actually. It spiked as, I believe, the highest it's ever been, over 20 Exalt for Bottled Faith, which was crazy, but then it had its descent, average of probably around 18-ish Exalt for the league or so. Pretty expensive, but we have to note that in Delirium, people were incredibly rich, and everybody wanted to play the Herald stacking build back then, and it needed Bottled Faith, so it was a very expensive item. If you look at Metamorph, for example, it was actually much more affordable, around the 12, like maybe 13, 14, 15x or so for the majority of the league. And then if you look at a last one, I guess, in Blight League, in Blight League was actually over 30x, so I had never seen that. So as you can see, historically speaking, Bottled Faith has been incredibly expensive for a long time. Now, if we look at this league, Bottled Faith is actually, well, it started off around the 10 Exalt mark or so, which was pretty regular, pretty average, maybe a little bit cheap, but not too bad, especially because of all these extra Xana maps that are being pumped with, the Maven Watchstones and all that, also especially the Uncharted Realms and whatnot. So it kept going down and down and down to the point where right now it's just over 1 Exalt for a Bottled Faith, which is absolutely insane. Okay, so why is that a good thing? Why is that a bad thing? So if we look on the positive side here, the vast majority of players who cannot afford a Bottled Faith at 20 or 30x now are capable of buying a Bottled Faith at 4 or 3 or 2x or even 1x, right? So it makes Bottled Faith, which is an incredibly strong item, much more available to players, and I would say is a good thing. But unfortunately, I would say, at least in my opinion, that the negatives actually outweigh the positives, and that's what we need to talk about right now. If we go to PoE Profit and we look at the profit from actually bossing right now, you will see that on average, farming Cortex is literally 4 Exalt loss. you will lose 4 exalts every single time you buy a Cortex. And Cortex is one of the hardest content in the game as well. And of course, it's part of the feared invitation. If we look at other things, though, for example, like Uber Elder, and we put a Watcher's Eye at 6 exalts, because let's say we're going to do unidentified Watcher's Eyes, which is how you would typically do Uber Elder in order to turn a profit, you will see that even with selling the Watcher's Eyes unidentified, currently Uber Elder is a loss of money. Uber Ziri is a loss of money as well. Elder is not quite fair because, again, it doesn't show Watcher's Eyes, but it's a loss of money. Like, pretty much every boss in the game, shy of basically Shaper, is a loss of money, and the reason for that is because Shaper drops the Uber Elder fragments. That's really the only reason why. That and the fact that the fragments are very, very cheap because of people farming invitations for the Guardians. Okay, so why is that a problem? Well, the feared right now, the feared invitation is basically the hardest content in the game. I would argue it's harder than 100% Delirious. It's harder than, pretty much everything shy of Deep Delving. Deep Delving is the only content in the game that is harder, I would say. So, it's literally the hardest content in the game. And right now, if you are a single individual who is farming bosses in order to farm the feared, you will lose money every time. And in my opinion, that makes no sense, right? It makes no sense that if I've earned the right to make my way up to the hardest content in the game, I can't even farm that content. I have to farm lesser tier content because I cannot compete with the people who are getting 7 times the value out of their boss fights. So what I mean by that is that if you're a single individual and you're doing Cortex, Uber, Elder, Ziri, also same thing, by the way, you're losing almost an exalt for Chiyula. You do all these different bosses and you do the feared. In the feared, you're going to get all those bosses again, which means technically you're getting twice the value, right? So you're getting 2 Chiyulas, you're getting, 2 Cortex bosses, 2 Elders, or 1 Uber Elder, 1 Elder, 1 Shaper, 2 Shapers, etc., right? Makes sense. All right, so that makes sense. But if you're doing it with 6 accounts, which is your main account, and then 5 alt accounts, but technically they're all you are actually able to get 7 times the value because you're getting the initial kill, the initial boss kill, and then you're getting 6 invitations worth of value that can net you some profit. And the reason why this is really, 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 really bad for the economy, despite the fact, at least this is my opinion, despite the fact that it makes some items like Bottled Faith much more affordable to people, and same thing with potentially Watcher's Eyes being much more cheap when it comes to the non-super GG1, so single stat Watcher's Eyes, like Hatred Crit, for example, being at some of the lowest it's ever been, while it makes it much more affordable for the majority of people, and I think that's good, I would say that the fact that it's literally impossible for a single player who doesn't want to go through, running multiple computers, or who can't run, virtual machines or whatever it is, literally cannot access that content because they are at the risk of losing money every single time they try it because they can't compete with people with 6 accounts. And that makes no sense. That literally does not make any sense that you can't do the highest tier content because people are doing it on multiple accounts. So that's why, in my opinion, they should not necessarily make it not allowed to multi-box because it's already an incredibly gray area with people using multiple computers and all that. They should make it not possible. So let's talk about that real quick. What's the solution to make this to where it doesn't really affect anybody that wants to legitimately farm bosses, and also that keeps these encounters relevant? It's just to make it so that witnessing is only given to the person who actually owns the map. Now, this is actually a lot more consistent if we look at the history of Path of Exile and things like quest lines like Cyrus, for example. Yes, if you go in a map with a buddy, you can share map completion, and that's a really good way to complete your atlas much easier than if you were to do it yourself. That's true. But if you get to a Conqueror and you kill the Conqueror, you won't drop 2 Watchstones. You will only drop a Watchstones for yourself because you're the person who is actively working in the quest line. And what's funny is that the Maven quest line is actually treated the exact same way. You cannot go in your buddy's 10-man encounter, right? 10-man boss fight in, let's say, Lexajoris, and get the passes unlocked for your Atlas. So why is it that you can get the witnessing for different bosses from your buddy's encounter and then do your own invitation for those bosses? In my opinion, it doesn't really make sense. If we look at it from a party play standpoint, a party play viewpoint, point of view, I should say, if you're doing these bosses in a party play, you're already getting, you know, additional value from playing in a party through additional quantity and all that, being able to do rippier maps, being able to do, you know, juicier maps and all that. You're already getting all those advantages from the fact that you're playing in a party. Why is it that all of a sudden you should each get an invitation for those bosses when nothing else in the game is treated that way? Like, literally nothing else in the game is actually treated that way. Every other encounter in the game, when it comes to things that are like quests or whatnot, are treated on an individual basis to where you have to do it yourself. I'm not sure why they thought this was a good idea, but let's just put it that way. It really wasn't, and of course, this is my opinion. Okay, so that pretty much does it for invitations. Now, the next point I want to make is basically farming beast farming. Now, beast farming, I'm a little bit actually more on the edge about. I don't think it's particularly bad for the game. You know, having, for example, an item which should on average cost you 250,000 alterations for just a handful of exalts, in my opinion, is really, really good, because it makes the majority of players basically able to afford these items. So why is there a problem? The problem with beast farming with multiple accounts, the biggest problem with it is that the people who do it, and this does not apply to everybody, but a lot of people who do it are not doing it legitimately. There's a lot of botting, and there's a lot of scripting, and there's a lot of very anti-TOS actions that are being done from the people in the beast farming community, and that is just a reality. Okay, so why is that a problem, and why should we punish everybody instead of basically just the people who are, you know, breaking the rules? And I agree that we should not just punish every single person by making it not possible or not allowed. What I think they should do is to make it to where if you want to farm beasts, especially because you don't want to affect party play and people who want to farm beasts in parties and all that, right? Beast rotations, for example, it's a very simple fix. You just have to basically make it like Soul Fight. Make it so if you kill a beast, in order to be able to get it, you have to be within its radius. And why is that a bad, or why is it a bad thing, you know, that one person can have 5 different accounts sitting at the start of the map, right? In order to get 6 times the beasts from a single encounter. Now, there used to be the argument that it really pushed the price of scarabs up like a lot, and it really did, but that argument kind of went out the window when Echoes of the Atlas came out, because it made beast farming so much more easier, and also just way more affordable, or I guess doable for even for free, really, with Echoes of the Atlas. But the thing is, that doesn't really fix the issue that there's massive amounts of monopoly around some of this farming. Now, I think it was last league, or maybe the league before that, every single beast farmer pretty much, or at least the known ones, and their crafting associates, if you want to call them that, all got banned. Now, does that mean that they were all technically breaking the rules? Was it just a wide ban from GG who's like, just get rid of all of them at once? I don't know. We can only speculate, but the fact is it was not an account locked. It's not like they all got their accounts locked and investigated. They literally all got banned. All of the known beast farmers and the people who they were supplying beasts in order to craft all got banned. Was it because of some, you know, RMT stuff? Was it because of script usage? If it was because of something like scripts, I don't see why the crafters would also get punished for it. Obviously, we can only speculate, but I've heard about a lot of the people in, I guess, the community, and I know a lot of people in the community, and I know how it works. And let's just say that if you were to look at a bird's eye view of the beast farming community, the vast majority of people are using methods that break terms of service. And if you simply made it to where you need all these different accounts to be close to the beast, within close proximity, you would basically fix the entirety of the problem. You would not necessarily make it so the average user cannot you know, afford things like a merciless jeweled foil celebration, or that they have to go back to alt spamming 250,000 alterations in order to get it. The only thing that you would do is you would make it so that people who want to farm beasts, either, you know, with their friends or even as solo players, would actually, it would be a viable strategy for them to farm them. To farm the beasts, especially with Echoes of the Atlas coming out and how easy it is to farm beasts nowadays with the different zones in Lyra Arthane and Turn's End. Now, of course, this is probably going to be scrambled in the upcoming league, but it does remain the fact that it's much, much, much easier than it's ever been, and Scarab prices are also super, super, super cheap nowadays because of how easy it is to farm Delirious maps for the more advanced players, and there's a ton, I guess you could say, of actual players farming them, so there's lots of competition. So yeah, doing it that way, you wouldn't punish the average player from, you know, being able to get those very, very hard to get bases for much more affordable prices, and not only that, you would also remove the monopoly of these different groups who are basically funneling beasts. Like, we're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of imprints and split beasts to, I guess you could say, their associate crafters in order to get these bases before anyone else. And then once they get those bases before anyone else, they can really snowball. Because the thing is, a Flaring Citadel Bow of Liquefaction right now might only be like you know, handful of exalts, but at the start of the league, the first person who actually made that base did not sell it, and we all know that nobody sold these bases. What they did is they had a monopoly on the entirety of the bleed bow market, and the same thing would apply for, like, for example, elemental hit bows, and the same thing would apply for example, foils, right? Like physical damage foils. The same thing would apply. The first person to get that given base is typically being funded by sources of beasts that are not farmed legitimately, and basically there's like these little alliances that are going on, and I know that this is like not necessarily something the players should be worrying about. It's GGG's job to enforce, you know, the different rules and make sure that, you know, people are actually following them. But in my opinion, if you just go to the root of the problem, which is the fact that you can have 5 AFK accounts at the start of the map, and you fix that, then it's actually going to be much more competitive to see who gets to these bases first, instead of being literally always the exact same people, because they are being fed an incredible amount of beasts by the exact same, I'm just going to go ahead and call them botters, because that's pretty much what they are when they're supplying hundreds and hundreds of these beasts on a daily basis within a few days of the league. So yeah, again though, when it comes to beast farming, I'm a little bit more on edge. I do think that it should still be doable. I just think that people should be within the actual radius of the beast when Einhar captures it. But when it comes to invitations, I really double down. In my opinion, I think that only the person who owns the map should be able to get the witnessing of the boss being killed, the same way that you would get your Conqueror questline advancing, but your buddy would not get your Conqueror questline advancing if you were to duo the Atlas with somebody else. Because it's just more consistent, and it's the way that it's always been. And the argument of party play doesn't really make any sense, because the amount of people who are actually doing rotations for invitations is almost none. Because, well, first off, if you were to take, like, for example, a feared invitation, I'm going to end the video on that note. If you were to do a feared invitations and do a rotation, you would need 6 different people who all have these bosses, right? Who all have, you know, an Uber Elder, an Uber Azirian, all the other required bosses. Each 6 people all have one of these encounters. Then one person goes and does all their encounters. Then they all go out and do a feared encounter. Then the next person goes, right? They do 6 of those, they do all the bosses. They all go out and do their own feared. And then so on and so on and so on, to where they get the value of 7 encounters at the price of only 1, since they got the actual I guess rotation going and completely done. Now here's the problem. Doing a rotation like that would literally take hours. It would take hours, and at that point, if you're actually going to be doing it that way, it's actually not even going to be that much more profitable than if you just did it as a solo player and you got 2 times the value but much faster instead. And this is where the problem occurs. If you're doing it with 5 accounts by yourself, you can actually do all of these 7 encounters within about 15 to 20 minutes. And I've already seen it being done on stream in about 15 minutes for all of these different encounters. So it's just way, way, way too fast. And the amount of inflation is just ridiculous. Not only that, now the fear is literally the hardest content in the game, the hardest encounter in the game. So it's only a handful of people in the entire game who are able to actually take advantage of that, who have the build, but also the computer or the virtual machine set up in order to be able to do it. And again, I just don't think that it should be doable, but that is my opinion. So hopefully this video basically helped you guys understand and bring some light, shed some light on these different encounters and why, in my opinion, both of them should be fixed by GGG for the greater good of the economy. Hopefully you guys don't hate me too much because I'm the one who put some of these methods on the map. But otherwise, before I go, I want to say a huge thank you to my supporters. So Jordan, Lost with the Map, Kremis, So Nice, Flame Scorpion, Nathaniel, Richard, JW Players, Scott, Young B, Tuk Tuk, Michael, Ashley, Pavlom's Cool, Keebs, Marcus, Justin, Matt, Kevin, Powell, Mercury, Ethan, Citri, Jared, Axel, and Acid, as well as huge thank you to Phenom and Trevor. And if it's not fixed, be sure to abuse it, because guess what? You won't be able to compete if you don't. So on that note, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.